Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with New York City Jazz Saxophonist, flutist, and composer, the great Steve Slagle. He was born in Los Angeles, raised in Philadelphia, and now calls New York City his home, and he's done that for quite some time. He just released 2017's Dedication that is charting well, and it's another gem in his entire line of music throughout his career. After going to the Berklee College of Music and getting a master's degree in music from the Manhattan School of Music, he would play with the best in the business, like Lionel Hampton, brother Jack McDuff, Carla Bley, along with traveling and performing with the legends Woody Herman and Calloway. His career path has taken him all over the world, and it's been a very good one, full of stories and wisdom. So get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Steve, thank you for taking a minute out. It's an honor to speak with you.
Oh, my pleasure. You're in Kansas, are you?
I'm in Kansas City, the home of Bird.
Oh, far out.
Yeah.
The home of a lot of good people, yeah.
One of the cradles. Yeah, so you spent some good time here?
Well, playing, yeah, for sure over the years. I've played in Kansas and all over the Midwest. So, yeah, for sure.
Right on. So let me go ahead and start off here. One of the things that's charting for you pretty well these days is Dedication. It really leaped quite a bit, actually, over the last couple of weeks. Talk to me about this album. How do you feel about this release?
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that because at first I thought you were going to say Alto Manhattan, which got a lot of play last year, and Dedication actually just came out. So I'm glad you say that because it's only been out about a week.
Yeah,
And I have gotten a lot of notice. It just went up on the internet sites just a day or so ago, and I'm really happy, to have it out there because it was a lot of work, about a year's worth of writing music that, the whole dedication concept is kind of a double meaning because, of course, you can't help but realize that in this music that we're involved with, which is never considered pop, not that I even like those categories because I like music to be popular, but the point being that, we're put in a category jazz that automatically makes it that you got to be pretty dedicated because a lot of people just automatically have a certain attitude, without even knowing. And also, if you ask 20 people what jazz is, you're going to get 20 different answers. So, in other words, it's kind of obscure. And so, the dedication part of it is obvious. But then, when I started writing, each song seemed to be have a certain person or place in mind after I wrote it. Not really when I'm writing a song. I actually don't think that way. It's almost after something is born that then you find a name for it or you go like, oh, that's like this kind of, because when it comes, it's just purely music and you don't really have, necessarily a name in mind. But when I started playing them, it became pretty clear that different ones like, and who they're dedicated to. So each song has a separate dedication on it.
It's interesting, the stigmata that jazz does bring with it. You came into the scene in New York in the mid to late 70s, and you were around a lot of storied cats like Lionel Hampton and brother Jack McDuff, and a lot of these guys that were practitioners for years and years and years. It didn't seem like there was that much of a stigmata at that time. And even before that, what happened? How did we get to that point where that's what's going on?
Well, that's a deep question because, first of all, when you're saying somebody like Lionel Hampton, you're talking about an era that hardly anybody's alive still from that era. And he was, at that time that he came up, jazz was the popular dance music. And so you have to understand that Lionel Hampton was an absolute superstar, was like Louis Armstrong and the people you can name that when I played with him, he would fill the largest concert halls in Europe, the ones that now rock bands are playing in or some jazz concerts. But the point being that there's a big difference between saying Lionel Hampton and Jack McDuff. I don't mean in musical talent. I mean in the business world. So the first and foremost is to realize that some people don't realize that Lionel was a huge star, and so that is an era when jazz was the so-called popular music. I think there's a lot of factors on that could be talked about for hours. But the main thing as an artist, you know, whether you're a painter of songs or a painter of canvas, you do what is your voice, what is your what you've developed as your sound or your voice, and then the rest falls into the business category and the cultural category, and that's a whole different subject. But for me, you know, I'm at the point now where I do exactly what I want to do in music, and then let the chips fall where they may, you know.
So let's talk about the beginnings of your life. You were born in L.A., raised in Philadelphia. Now you're in New York. Talk to me about how you got into not only music, but more specifically jazz.
Well, I was lucky, in I guess, to be born into it in the sense that, first of all, I, at a real young age, listened to the records of my parents and my uncles and various people in my family, grandfather, and all were playing. And so before I even could speak, I was hearing records, you know, that are now considered classic records, you know, around about midnight and stuff, you know, kind of blue and stuff was what I grew up with. And I just always liked the music, but I also specifically liked the sound of the saxophone. So at a real young age, you know, before I could articulate it, I just liked the sound of it. And so as soon as I got to be old enough to be able to hold one, which really you have to kind of be about fourth grade or so before you can actually, in other words, piano and drums are actually the best instruments to start on. Although many people don't start on the drums, I think that's actually the best instrument to start on, to be truthful, because anybody can play it at any age. But with saxophone, as soon as I got physically big enough to hold one, I got one, and from then on I've been playing. You know.
You went to the Berklee College of Music. You've got your master's from the Manhattan School. You're a well-educated man. What did formal education teach you? You've obviously gotten a lot of experience throughout your life, just being on a stage. But what did formal education give you?
It depends specifically on the teachers and classes, but certainly certain teachers and certain curriculums really were helpful. I do think that you learn this music in a way like separate from a college or university, and then you take what you learn to there and meet other people, because I don't really think you can learn jazz in any school, but I do think it's helpful to be around, especially when I went to Berklee at the age of 18. Suddenly I was thrown into a world-class environment where, in other words, everyone from Berklee was from all over the world, and where any of the places that I came from, I was just in the area that I went to school, and it was a lot more limited. So the great thing about a school like Berklee is that, and Manhattan School of Music too, is that they bring people from all over the world that are doing similar things that you're doing, and so you meet people that are your age that are doing it, and I think that's even the most important thing. And then the curriculum of the school varies from school to school. I've also taught or done clinics at countless number of schools, and some have better systems and curriculums than others, and it seems to be here to stay now. It wasn't when I first was 18 and went to Berklee. There were only about 3 or 4 in the whole world schools that actually, in other words, the Manhattan School of Music at that time you could not get in there as a saxophone player. It wasn't until much later. So when I started, it was very few, and now it's thousands, and that's something that's happened in my lifetime. It's changed what the business of music is, because now getting a teaching job is almost more important than getting a recording. But I still believe that the art of recording and playing music live is the highest level of the art, and that education is a subset of that.
Speaking about the ultimate education, you arrived in New York in the mid-'70s. What was it like at that time? How exciting was it?
Well, it was a lot different, and in some ways the same, because New York has always had an aura to it. But the specific thing in the 70s was, I came in 77, so it would be kind of the late 70s when I got here. But it was rolling in the sense of you could find places to live and even large lofts and stuff, fairly easily. I mean, if you pooled your money up with a few other musicians and stuff, you could get a loft and be playing music 24/7 in New York City. And there was a certain great energy to that, which only lasted maybe about 10 years, and then things kind of changed. But I came at that time, not even knowing that was the sense. I came to New York because, all the musicians I knew and all the recordings I was listening to were all done in New York, And I always, as a kid, with whoever could drive a car, I would go into New York when I was 15 or 16 and see Thelonious Monk or Miles or somebody like Mingus, and so at a young age I knew New York was the place where that was the best, and it's pretty much been my home for way more than half my life.
So the one thing about a musician is that by osmosis over the years you kind of become a teacher because of those you played with. What did you learn from the likes of Woody Herman or Cab Calloway and even Lionel Hampton? What did they give you that not only helped you but made you a better teacher to younger players?
Well, each one was different, and with a smile, I'd have to say the one thing they gave me was employment, and that's the most important thing, and that's no joke. And each one of them was different. I especially think Cab Calloway is not recognized as a really great gentleman and leader that he was. He was one of the ones you named, one of the ones that was the most pleasant to know and very. I guess you could say he had this kind of sophistication that I think Duke Ellington and some of the greats from that era, had. I never met Duke Ellington, but I think Cab was a close. Cab rubbed shoulders with all those people and kind of had that kind of sophistication, and so with him I learned that, and also he let you play, and he loved the saxophone, and he would talk about people that had played with him, and so there was a real walking history book that now the younger students I have no idea about that, and I'm glad I kind of caught the tail end of it, because really Cab was an elderly man by the time I played with him, and so was Lionel, and so it's really kind of the tail end that I caught, and I'm glad I did. At the time, to be honest with you, I was just happy to be being employed playing my instrument,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the one thing that's been really cool about your career is that you've really done a lot of cross-genre stuff. You've played with St. Vincent, Elvis Costello, the Beastie Boys. What have you had to retool the way you approach the stage or a recording, being with those kinds of musicians that aren't strictly jazz?
Not at all. No, not at all. Any of those that you mentioned, the answer would be no. It's exactly the same. Elvis Costello is a really open-minded musician, and so what he does is play himself, and what he wants you to do is play yourself. And so, and for instance, with the Beastie Boys, I was just a record date. They called me and wanted a flute sound, and they had heard my recording of me on flute, and they wanted something like that on their record. So that's specifically them calling and wanting my sound. So no, none of that ever has to do with changing what is you, and so that's you take yourself to a situation, and that's really what it is.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about change here. You've had the chance to go around the world, Western Europe, Japan, South America, just Russia, all over the place. How much did travel influence you and your music?
Oh, well, that's a great question, Joe, because that's something sometimes I reflect on, is that when, let's say I'm a kid in Los Angeles getting my first saxophone, to be honest with you, all I thought was I wanted to play the saxophone, and I wouldn't, in my mind, if I stayed where I was born and was able to play the saxophone my whole life, that would be my ambition. And so I never really realized at all that this music has taken me all around the world, and for sure that actually would be the biggest thing that really opens you up and gives you experiences that you otherwise, unless you were very wealthy and a bon vivant that just traveled around the world, which is just the 1%, which we certainly aren't. With the musician, you can see the world more than most billionaires do, and I'm lucky I did, and it for sure gives you a perspective on the country you're from. I mean, I'm definitely from the United States, and my music reflects that, but my experience has been to see reactions to my music even stronger in other countries than in the area that I even was born in. Like for instance, Japan and Italy, France. I could keep going. Sweden and all have really had sometimes greater audiences and greater respect for what I do than even areas in the country where I live. And so that gives me a different perspective on this whole world thing and this whole nationalism that's happening right now. To me, it's not true. I think the music is a universal language, and so as you get further and explore it further, you realize that there aren't the boundaries that everyone else, the walls that everyone else wants to set up, or really don't exist.
Yeah, something that's kind of hyper local to what today, being the day that Pearl Harbor was attacked. Being a lifelong New Yorker and living through 9/11, speaking of nationalism and things that kind of pull you together, how did living through that, being a native or being in New York as long as you have, how did that affect the way you played your horn or the way you play the flute?
I was here that day and living, in fact, in the same area the same apartment that I have now. I'm right on the Hudson River, straight up from the World Trade Center. The Hudson River just goes straight to my door, and so literally the smoke and fumes of it reached here by that evening, and certainly by that next morning. It was like a horrible smell in the air, and which lasted for a day or so. And that's just a physical thing, but mentally, it was huge. We actually we were supposed to do a 2-week tour with Joe Lovano's Non-Ed, and we had just done the record that we won a Grammy for, 52nd Street Themes, and I've arranged for the band, and it was a great band, and we were going to go on a 2-week tour that Tuesday. And we were supposed to fly that Tuesday to California, in fact, and that was all canceled because plane flights were, and so again, it has to do with employment, and it for sure affects employment. But then when you start counting the catastrophe of people's lives, and different friends of mine who directly lost loved ones, it just to this day, it's still a huge sore spot and a catastrophe that you were living part of, and you don't forget. And interestingly, that year I had a record out called New York on Omnitone Records, which is now a defunct label. But I had, before 9/11, a year before, recorded this record called New York, which to me was symbolic when that happened, because New York is always becoming something new and morphing into something slightly different, and these kind of things make changes like that, for sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. But music endures in the worst and the best times, and so it doesn't ever stop. Sometimes when the economy is the worst, the music is the best, and so, as an artist, you reflect on all these things, and they definitely affect your art,
Absolutely. Speaking of your art, after all of these years that you've played, how do you feel about your career? How do you think everything's panned out up to this point?
Well, I'm really glad that I have been able to make a living playing, the saxophone and flute and writing music. You're always more happy when the phone rings and for the next project. But I'm very feel very fortunate that I found a great producer in Rick Simpson, who has produced the last 3 records that I've done. He's a great ally to the music, and it's kind of started his own business of production. And so the last 3 records I've done, starting with Roots with Dave Stryker, and then Alto Manhattan, which has the double meaning because that's really where I live. Alto is the upper Manhattan, and the Latino folks in my neighborhood refer to this as Alto Manhattan. So when I made the record, it totally made sense to me. And that was Rick Simpson's first production of my solo record. And then this new one, Dedication, which is just coming out, is also his he's the executive producer. I produce the music and the logistics of getting the players and all, but he's the executive producer of the record, and that's been really fortunate. And so I that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I hope can keep happening, to be able to have your own voice out there and work, and that's really, I feel happy about that. The business, I have daughters that have interest in music and talent, and I don't, they're young, very young, but I don't necessarily encourage or discourage anyone getting into the business of music, but I think the art of music and the business are two different things, and so you have to kind of be savvy in both of them, because you can't just be the artist side, because there is a whole business and to it, and so that's part of the deal on what you have to spend a lot of time on, and that's another side of it. But no, all in all, I feel like I came here at a great time, and I feel like it's a great time now. I mean, people talk about the golden era of this and that, but honestly, Joe, I always feel like in any era that you live in is a golden era, and I don't mean that in any light sense, in a cliche or anything. I just think that it's always the golden era, and
Absolutely.
the next time you play is the golden moment, and I always feel that. I feel like it's always getting better. Like the new record, I feel, is the best I've ever done, and I think I guess I always feel that, but it's always for the moment,
Absolutely. Well, let's just speak strictly of art here, and let me ask you this. Why do you love jazz?
I think it's the most creative form of music that's come down on the planet. The only thing I could compare it to would be the hundreds and hundreds years old Indian music, where they also base their music on improvisation. And that's the only music I think that at least is codified that has existed longer than jazz. It's based purely on improvisation, and then also the rhythmic aspect of drums and the importance of rhythm in the music, to me, makes jazz unique. With a lot of American pop music, I like some of it, but the ones that don't have a lot of rhythm or good polyrhythm to it are not interesting to me, and so to me, the music of jazz has the most rhythm to it, and also the most creativity. There is one thing to polishing a song and playing exactly the same every time, which is kind of a certain kind of pop mentality, but that gets pretty boring after a while, and you see that a lot of people that just go and play a song the same way every time, pretty soon they can't do it. So the thing about because it's no fun. Music is a spirit, I believe. Any music, not just jazz, but all music is a spirit, and you have to treat the spirit the right way for it to give back to you. And I think the history of jazz shows that there's some people have really called on that spirit pretty strongly, and so I like to try to continue calling it,
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. Everyone has a version of who you are, your family, your friends, your fans, those that you perform for. But when you wake up and you face the world, who do you think you are?
That's a good one. Yeah, I mean, you never really know how other people think of you, and when you read reviews or anything, you know, you take them with a grain of salt, and because there's an art to writing words too, and some reviewers aren't very good at that art, period, even no matter what they're writing about. But when I wake up in the morning, I'm glad to be alive, and I'm happy if I can spend, if I'm not working or doing a gig, I'm happy if I can be writing music and really practicing music. That never ends for me. Never ends. And you know, right now I'm working on a piece that's harmonically really difficult and trying to figure out how to work it out and play it myself. And so, you know, that to me is what I am. The rest is making a living and being able to pay the bills. But I'm happy if I can spend my time in music and in any way.
That's beautiful. That's a great way, I think, to wrap everything up. Steve, thank you for taking a minute, being gracious enough to talk to me about your new album and about your life and music. Thanks for the music.
Oh, Joe, it's my pleasure, and keep the faith strong, man. I think I've discovered through the last few records how many radio stations there are in the United States that are playing the music either on the internet or on traditional radio waves or whatever way, and I don't discount that at all now, and I'm kind of appreciate it even more than I used to because of these last two records, because I realize they're getting played all over the country, and I think the people like you that are doing that are really a huge part of keeping this music alive.
We're only as good as the shoulders we stand on, and you guys are the ones putting it out there, so I appreciate it, absolutely. And it's my pleasure.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Los Angeles, Philadelphia, New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Steve for his time, his wisdom, and his stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.